Hi, everyone. Welcome to Grow Love Girl. I'm Adriana,
And I'm Jenya. Welcome.
and today we're going to be talking about managing conflict in relationships, a really important topic, whether you're in a new relationship, a long-term relationship, or a partnership with someone. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic partner. But I'm really excited, Jenya, to talk about this topic because I've been reading an amazing book called What Makes Love Last by John Gottman, and he runs the Love Lab, which is over 20 years of reviewing couples in a state where they're hooked up to different wires and sensors and truly getting the physiological impact during conflict. And so a lot of things I'll talk about today stem from what he's seen, those many, many years of hundreds of couples going through conflict. But I know I had a lot to learn growing through my long-term relationships with conflict. What was your general experience in managing conflict in your relationships?
Well, I think this topic is fascinating because I was actually reluctant to talk to you about it today because from my own experience, I was in a very unhealthy situation and my partner was not a healthy partner. So I never learned, or maybe I never had healthy conflict management in that long relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested to learn from you and to see what they kind of the your experiences are and what the learnings are from the book that you're reading. But
Mm-hmm.
also I'd like to share some of the conflict issues that arise in an unhealthy relationship or in a relationship with somebody who has a personality disorder.
I think that's perfect and it's so relevant. One thing we were talking about before we started is how we hope this can help younger women, women who are just kicking off long-term relationships, because I feel like so many things, I didn't have the ability to manage conflict. You just don't know. And you
Right.
get trapped in cycles where it's really negative. So to have these tools, I can't imagine to have had these tools when we were younger and just having our initial long-term relationships, I think it would have made such a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times when you are, a young girl going into a long-term relationship, you may not feel comfortable asking for advice
Yeah.
or going to somebody older, more experienced, like your mom, because you really don't want to kind of air out all your dirty laundry, right? You don't want everybody to know that that your relationship is not perfect.
Yeah.
So you kind of steep inside your head and keep everything inside, and you really don't have a place to go where you can share, where you can get advice from. So I'm hoping that in addition to this being therapeutic for us because we're sharing and kind of exploring our own lives, I'm
Mhm.
hoping that this will also be helpful to some of the women out there.
Completely agree. So let's kick off. One of the things that I read in this book from Dr. Gottman was really interesting. He was able to gauge how and if couples would maintain long-term relationships, if they would stay together or get divorced, based on all of his findings from the labs. One of the most important things he found during conflict management was if one of the partners, or ideally both of the partners, had the capacity to express some type of positivity during the conflict exchange. And that predicted if they would be together and if they would still be happy. A lot of it was based on a partner's intuition when they feel like they could step in, but it was something simple like a smile, a little laugh, some humor, grabbing your partner's hand, just an expression of love. Immediately your positive effect reduces the physiological stress in your partner. And he saw that time and time again. He said you don't need a happy face to lower conflict, but you can move to a neutral place at least, and move the dynamic. So that capacity to express positivity is one of the most important and initial tools.
That's really good to know, and that's so important. I can see how that could reduce the stress that a potential conflict will cause,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
If you realize that somebody's approaching you in a loving way, in a positive way, that they're not looking to have a fight per se,
Right. Yes.
right? That's more of a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. He saw in the heat of the moment, something happens in partners in really heated exchange, and it's called flooding. And I think we've all experienced this. But what it is a cocktail of hormones that get triggered. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, you feel bodily stress. But what's really interesting is that it causes true tunnel vision. You lose the ability to listen, to process anything, to problem solve, and the ability to be empathetic. And what was worse is that men tended to have a deeper experience of flooding than women.
Mm,
Um, and he attributed that to men and their forebears being hunter gatherers, and they were always constantly vigilant and
mhm,
had to have either a fight or flight response in reaction to a perceived danger. This
mm,
translates into a modern man having this immediate flooding effect on him when he's in a conflict.
mhm.
Some men are even more biologically predisposed to have even more intense flooding than others. But nothing can get through. There's no ability to have a repair mechanism, and that clarity of thought gets shut off.
So it's
So
kind of like that giant defense, right? They just built this wall.
yeah, and they can get so angry. They're full of intense emotions, and it's those moments when you can't get through to them. um I've experienced flooding myself. It's you really can't control it. You're just so upset, and you do get that tunnel vision.
So does
um
the author recommend then stepping back and taking a little time? What is his suggestion in these situations?
yeah, so move to that expression of a physical touch, a smile,
Mhm,
something that takes away the stigma of the situation. But don't even let it get that far, right? Don't let the argument get that heated. And this
mhm,
is really important. Sometimes women and even men can't control this, right? So it's if you don't have a partner that's willing to practice these things, it's really significant, and can have really deep damage on your relationship.
mhm,
He said the underlying issue is really not the ability to manage conflict, but being attuned to your partner. And attunement, I think, is something that a lot of people haven't heard of before, but maybe you practice naturally.
mhm,
It really stems and is founded in your relationship through infancy, mostly with the mother figure in your life. So you
mhm,
build an understanding of attunement from your attachment to your mother figure. It simply means being present, being connected, understanding, and caring for that person, and making sure that person is heard, right?
mhm,
If there's no attunement, then you're not understanding each other's inner life. You can't communicate. But it's truly that blueprint that makes trust in a relationship and helps define long term relationships. Can you
mhm,
understand your partner's perspective?
mhm.
There is a school of thought called Imago therapy that really talks about this in tangible ways. And I know you're familiar with it. Can you tell us a little bit about what Imago does?
Yeah, so some of the things that I recall about Imago is that it's a very kind of practical method of having this healthy communication, that's very tuned in to your partner hearing and listening. So
Mhm,
one of the things that they recommend, or the methods that they suggest, are that you make sure that you set a time and you consult with your partner before you have the conversation. Like, darling, at 7 o'clock, is this a good time for us to
mhm,
talk? And
mhm,
you get consent agreement,
mhm,
and then
mhm.
you say whatever it is that you need to express, and then you ask your partner to repeat it back to you.
Like actually repeat those words back.
What I hear you say is
Mhm.
yes, or you can repeat in your own words, but
Yeah.
want to confirm that what you're hearing is correct, and you're not misinterpreting things, you're not hearing something else, you're not having the story in your head replace what they're actually saying, right?
So
So
interesting.
so
And
the
I
conversation is very interactive in that way, that you're not just simply responding to what they're saying, but you're repeating back what they're saying, so that you're actually very truly are hearing them, right?
wow. Wow. I think that's excellent and really talks to the idea of that capacity to understand your partner, right?
Yeah.
Hits upon those important things to be attuned to them. You can practice attunement by shifting your focus from what you're feeling to what your partner's feeling. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. By repeating what your partner's saying, you're literally shifting the focus. And from that interaction, you can understand what they're going through and have empathy for them and really have that capacity to express love for them, right?
Yeah,
And
and
that's
I think as the other partner, you feel like you're being heard, right?
yes.
Which so often in conflict and in relationships, you feel like you're not heard and you're just talking to the wall, right? And when that person is repeating back what you're saying, I think that's very rewarding, you know?
Yes. So I know you have experience with different personality disorders in some relationships. Can you talk about what conflict is like with a personality disorder?
Well, I have the experience that I have is conflict with somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder, right?
Mhm,
And potentially there was a mix of disorders. They're not
mhm,
diagnosed, so it's
mhm.
difficult to pinpoint which ones.
Yeah.
But in the conflict with a narcissist, it's basically something that never gets resolved, and there are various situations that take place, and if you try to address somebody with NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, usually what you get back is word salad. So they will mix words and they will talk in circles, and you may have these long hours and hours of conversations that don't get anywhere.
Wow.
And things like gaslighting will step in there because they'll try to say how they never said something, they never did something. Stonewalling, where they would just refuse to communicate. I remember with my ex, towards the very end of our relationship, I would say, "Listen, things aren't working. We really need to talk."
Hmm.
Turn over and go to sleep, and I would just hear him snore. Or
Mm.
he'll say, "Okay, let's talk in the morning," and he'll make sure that he's out of the house before I had a chance to approach him. Or
Wow.
sometimes I would literally have to chase him around the house to try to have a conversation, but
Mhm.
he did not want to speak about things, so talk about things. So it's avoidance, it's stonewalling, it's silent treatment, it's word salad, it's gaslighting, and a
Yeah.
combination of all of those things. Yeah.
I think that's important to point out because you really can't manage conflict if someone is unhealthy, right? And at that point, if you're recognizing these traits, go seek professional help, talk to someone, even if it's on your own, to get that support and either manage it with your partner or understand what you need to do to feel safe and to be okay in or out of that relationship.
And I would most definitely recommend seeing a counselor on your own if you're in that situation, and
Mhm.
maybe bringing in your partner after a couple of visits. But initially, I think it's important that you're heard and there's not somebody else's voice stepping into it.
Yeah.
And depending on the counselor, sometimes they can very well get roped in by the narcissist,
Wow.
not understand what they're seeing, because it takes time and not all the therapists are trained in
Hmm.
personality disorders. I've experienced it myself. So my recommendation would be to first go on your own
Hmm.
and speak to your counselor about what you're seeing, and then, bring in your partner and see if there's hope for
Yeah.
potential resolution or not.
Excellent advice. Really important, except especially for women who are younger and are
Yeah.
just starting these relationships, and it may be difficult to see these signs and symptoms to begin with, but it's really important example. One of the other things that was shared in the book, we tend as humans to have human nature around recall of events where we have better recall, almost twice as likely recall for unfinished events versus things you have completed. And how that translates in relationship and relationship conflict is if you have an unfinished or unaddressed issue, the hurt remains in your accessible memory. You haven't completed that conversation, you haven't brought that issue up, something offended you, something hurt your feelings, but you haven't talked about it or talked about it to the point of resolution, it remains in your accessible memory and really upfront. That leads to micro injuries in your relationship, really negative interactions, and a constant irritant. And that negativity really brings down the relationship, potentially to the point of breaking up. So when you have that feeling of this is going to stay in my mind, or this is unresolved and my partner seems not to care, it's important to bring that to the forefront if you want to stay away from those potential constant negative energies.
This reminds me of something that I read where when you're afraid of confrontation, would you rather have rejection or regret, right?
Wow.
So
Great.
you're afraid of confrontation because you don't want to be rejected. One of the things that I fear, and I'm being completely authentic and vulnerable here, is that I fear, oh gosh, if I confront this person, they're not going to want to be with me. It's over,
Yeah.
But I think we've talked about in one of our other podcasts as well. If you're rejected because of that, because you're expressing yourself, then you'd rather be rejected now and know who your partner truly is, right? If they don't want to hear you.
Yeah.
Or would you rather have regret later on because this has eaten you alive, you have resentment, and you realize later on down the line that you don't want to be in a relationship with this person? So do you want to make a choice at this point, if you're afraid of confronting them, whether you'd rather have rejection or regret? And I think rejection is what I would rather have, right?
Yeah. It can be painful at first, rejection, right? But
regret is worse.
Regret is worse, and you can spend years in a relationship and then have really horrible regrets, right?
Yeah. One other thing that came up in my research on conflict, and probably more on my guru spiritual side, is the role of the ego.
Ooh.
Right? So ego is your story and your identity. Ego is not necessarily bad or good, right? It just is.
Yeah.
It's neutral. And when you lead with your ego, and when your ego is big, it's a result of lack of self-awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not aware of yourself and who you are, then your ego presents itself in the conflict in a way that's probably not so beneficial to conflict resolution, right? So being self-aware, allowing space for the other person, and really considering that their feelings, because the ego loves to be right? So you want to be correct, you want to be better, because that affirms your existence. I am who I am, and therefore I'm right and others are wrong.
Wow.
And as soon as you make the other person wrong, your conflict's probably not going to get resolved, right? So I think it goes back to attunement, to seeing the other person's viewpoint, right? And really working on your self-awareness.
Yeah, that's an incredible example. Yeah, completely agree. So really nice personal examples as well. Thank you for sharing them. I know they come from your heart. I think if we're going to summarize conflict management in relationships, some of the most important pieces are having empathy and attune to your partner, and check in that you are receiving the same. And that's really important. Be aware of flooding and take a time out if you need to, come back at an agreed upon time, but try to prevent or be aware of flooding. And then express some positivity during a conflict exchange, and you'll immediately reduce that physiological stress on yourself and on your partner. And it can help bring you back to center and in a place where you have a rational mind to discuss, right?
Yes, and definitely be aware of having a healthy partner, right? Ensuring that your partner is receptive to your needs, and all these tools and methods apply to having a healthy partner. If you find that you're seeing things like word salad, where your conflicts are not getting resolved, where you're getting stonewalled, where you're getting silent treatments or gaslighting, and we have more episodes about that, then you should probably be on alert.
Really, really great advice. This was a heavy topic, but I think you and I did a great job, and I hope we gave some really tangible tips.
Yeah, you with your tips, the scientific tips, the scientists.
Yes, love it. Thank you, Jenya, and we will see you all next time. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe. Thank you.